She didn't call. She texted. That's the part I keep coming back to. After 31 years together. 31 years of mortgage payments and Sunday dinners and sitting up until 2 in the morning when her mother was sick, she didn't have the decency to pick up the phone. She sent a text. Theo's birthday weekend is family only. You know how he gets. It's better if you stay at the condo. I read it twice. Then a third time, standing in the kitchen, coffee going cold in my hand, still in my robe because it was 6:40 in the morning, and I hadn't even had a chance to wake up properly before my marriage announced itself to be something other than what I thought it was. Theo. Her son, 26 years old, worked at a car dealership in Decatur, hadn't held a job for more than 8 months at a stretch since he graduated high school. I had known him since he was 11. I had coached his little league team. I had driven him to the emergency room the night he broke his arm, trying to skateboard down the back porch steps. I had sat across from his principal 3 separate times. I had paid for 2 years of community college he never finished. Family only. I set my phone face down on the counter. I poured the cold coffee into the sink. I stood there for a while looking out to the backyard, the oak tree I planted the year we moved in, the garden she'd stopped tending 4 summers ago, the fence I repainted by myself last September because she said she didn't want to deal with the mess. Then I went upstairs, got dressed, and drove to the hardware store. Not because I needed anything, just because I needed to move. I want to be honest about something. I wasn't perfect in this marriage. I worked too much in the early years. I wasn't always emotionally present. There were stretches where I was physically in the house but somewhere else entirely in my head, carrying problems from work like rocks in my pockets. I know that. I've sat with that. But I was there. I showed up. Every single time it counted, I showed up. When my wife's first husband, Theo's father, walked out in 2003, she had a 9-year-old boy, a part-time job at a dental office, and a car with a transmission that was slowly dying. I met her 8 months after that. We married 2 years later. I adopted Theo legally. I put his last name on forms, showed up at school events, sat at the dinner table every night for 15 years. His father, the biological one, sent birthday cards maybe 4 times in 20 years. Maybe. I'm not telling you this so you'll think I'm a saint. I'm telling you so you understand what that text message meant. Family only. Like I was a neighbor who'd overstayed his welcome. Like 31 years and a legal adoption certificate were just paperwork that could be set aside when inconvenient. I drove home from the hardware store without buying anything. I sat in the driveway for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the dashboard. Then I went inside and called my accountant. Let me back up a little. My name is not important. What I do for work, what city we lived in. None of that matters for this story. What matters is that I'd spent the better part of 3 decades building something. A business, a home, a life that I believed was shared. My wife, I'll call her Nadine, was, for most of our marriage, a good woman. I want to say that clearly. She was warm. She was funny in a dry, quiet way that most people missed. She had a gift for making a house feel like a home. For the first 20 years, I would have told anyone who asked that I was the luckiest man I knew. But somewhere around year 22 or 23, something shifted. Theo moved back in with us after his second failed apartment situation. He was 23. He'd been engaged briefly to a woman in Nashville. That didn't last. He came back quiet and a little bitter, and Nadine went into a kind of protective mode I hadn't seen since he was a child. Closing ranks. Softening every edge of any conversation that might hold him accountable for anything. I tried to be patient. I know what it is to love a child. I know it doesn't have an expiration date. But Theo was not a child anymore, and patience without limits isn't patience. It's just surrender. What I didn't know at the time was that Nadine had started talking to someone, not an affair. At least I don't believe it was. But there was a man, someone from her past, someone she'd known before me, who had come back into her orbit. They'd reconnected at a class reunion. He'd been texting her for about a year before I found out. I found out by accident. A notification came up on the iPad we shared for recipes and crossword puzzles, and the name I didn't recognize, and the words I wasn't meant to see. I didn't confront her about it then. That's probably what most people would have done, but I'm 63 years old, and I've learned that confrontation without information is just noise. So I waited. I watched. I paid attention in a way I probably should have been paying attention for years, and what I saw was a woman who had already made a decision, who was already living, in her mind, somewhere other than our marriage, while still occupying the house I paid for, driving the car I insured, using the credit card attached to my account. That's a particular kind of loneliness, watching someone leave in slow motion while they're still sitting across from you at dinner. The birthday weekend text came on a Thursday morning in October. Theo's birthday is in October. He was turning 26. Nadine had apparently been planning something, a dinner at a restaurant, maybe a night out somewhere, and she had, apparently, decided that this occasion required the presence of Theo's biological father. The man's name doesn't matter. What matters is that he had been largely absent for 15 years. What matters is that Theo, who had grown up calling me Dad, who had asked me to walk with him at his high school graduation, who had borrowed money from me more times than I had kept count of, had apparently decided, at 26, that he wanted a relationship with the man who left. I understand that impulse. I genuinely do. A person has a right to know where they came from. But the way it was handled, that's what I can't get past. Nobody told me. Nobody said, we've been in contact with him. Theo wants to reconnect. Here's what's happening. Instead, I got a Thursday morning text telling me to stay at the condo that I owned, that I had purchased as a rental property 12 years ago, so that another man could sit at my dinner table on my son's birthday. I sat with that for about 2 hours. Then I made some phone calls. The first call was to my accountant, like I said. The second was to my attorney. The third was to my financial advisor. I wasn't emotional on any of these calls. That surprised me a little, honestly. I had expected to feel something sharp, anger, grief, something with an edge. Instead, I felt very clear, very still, like when a fog lifts, and you can suddenly see exactly how far the road goes. I told my accountant I wanted to separate my personal assets from the joint accounts, not drain them, not hide anything. I'm not that kind of man, but to draw a clear line. What was mine before the marriage and what had grown from my individual business income was going to be reorganized, legally, properly, with full documentation. I told my attorney I wanted to understand my options regarding the house. We had purchased it together, but the down payment had come entirely from my savings. The mortgage had been paid almost entirely from my income. Nadine had worked part-time for most of our marriage, her choice, not mine, and contributed to the household in other ways, but the financial architecture of our life together was built on one foundation, and I needed to understand what that meant legally. I told my financial advisor to restructure my retirement accounts. Everything that could be legally separated and protected, I wanted protected. Again, not hidden, not fraudulent, just clear. By noon, I had set things in motion that I knew I couldn't walk back easily. I also called the realtor who had sold us the house 17 years ago. She was still in the business. She was surprised to hear from me. I told her I might want to talk about our options. She said she could come by Monday. I didn't tell Nadine any of this. I packed a bag, enough for 2 weeks, and I drove to my brother's place in Chattanooga. My brother is 3 years younger than me, retired military, and one of the most unflappable people I've ever known in my life. I called him from the road. He said, "How far out are you?" I told him 3 hours. He said, "I'll have dinner ready." That was it. That was the whole conversation. 58 years of brotherhood, and that's all it needed to be. I didn't reach out to Nadine that weekend. She texted twice, once Friday night, once Saturday afternoon. Both messages were light, casual, the kind of texts you'd send to someone you assumed was fine. Nothing that acknowledged what she'd done. Nothing that sounded like a woman who understood what door she might have just closed. I responded both times. Brief. Neutral. Everything is fine. Just taking some time. Because here's what I've learned at 63. When you react loudly, you give people information. You show them how much they've affected you, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, that information gets used. I wasn't ready to give anyone information yet. The birthday dinner apparently went well. I know because Theo posted photos on social media. Him at a restaurant I'd taken him to for his 18th birthday. Nadine on one side of him, a man I recognized from old photographs on the other side. I looked at that photo for a long time. I'm not going to tell you I felt nothing. I'm 63, not a robot. But what I felt wasn't what I expected. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even heartbreak exactly. It was something more like recognition, like I was finally seeing clearly something that had been blurry for a long time. I put the phone down and went to sit on my brother's back porch. He came out after a while and sat beside me. We watched the sun go down over the tree line. At some point he said, "You know you don't have to explain anything to me." I said I knew. He said, "And you know whatever you decide, I've got you." I said I knew that too. We sat there until it got dark. When I came home Monday, Nadine was at work. I walked through the house slowly, not dramatically. I wasn't cataloging losses or anything like that. I just wanted to see it clearly. The way you look at something when you know it's going to change. The realtor came at 2 o'clock. We walked through every room. She told me what she thought it would list for. The number was higher than I expected. The neighborhood had appreciated considerably in the past 5 years. She said we could probably move it within 60 days if we priced it right. I told her to draw up the paperwork. That evening, Nadine came home and I was making dinner. We ate together. We talked. She told me about something that had happened at work. I asked a few questions. It was a normal Tuesday evening on the surface. And then, over the dishes, I told her. Not with anger. Not with a speech. I just told her I'd been thinking since Thursday, and I'd made some decisions, and I thought she deserved to hear them directly from me rather than find out secondhand. I told her I'd spoken to an attorney. I told her the house was going to be listed. I told her I'd already begun reorganizing the financial accounts in accordance with what was legally mine. She turned around from the sink slowly. And the look on her face, I want to be careful how I describe it. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was more like she was recalculating something, running numbers in her head. She said, "You're not serious." I said, "I'm very serious." She said, "Because of one birthday dinner." And that's when I understood, completely and finally, that we were not having the same conversation. She thought this was a reaction, an emotional response to one specific incident. She did not understand that the Thursday text had simply been the moment I stopped waiting to be sure. I said, "This isn't about the dinner." She didn't ask what it was about. I think she knew. The next few weeks were, as you might imagine, not easy. There were conversations I don't want to detail here because they belong to us, even now, even after everything. There was a period of what I can only describe as negotiation. Nadine going back and forth between apologetic and defiant, sometimes in the same hour. There were things said on both sides that I would not want anyone else to have to hear. Theo called me once, about 10 days after I'd told Nadine. He was confused and, I think, a little scared. He'd grown up with a certain understanding of how his life was structured, and part of that structure was me. Even when he'd been inconsiderate, even when he'd taken things for granted, I was the constant. I was the steady thing. He said, "Dad, I didn't know she was going to do that." The text. I said, "I believe you." He said, "I didn't ask her to exclude you." I said, "I know." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "So what happens now?" I said, "I'm still your father. That doesn't change. Whatever happens with your mother and me, you and I are separate from that." He didn't say anything for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, younger. He said, "I'm sorry. About all of it, I've taken a lot for granted." I said, "You're 26. You've still got time to grow up." He laughed a little. It was a real laugh. "I'll hold on to that. Here's what I want to tell you about the other man. Theo's biological father. The one who came to the birthday dinner. The one whose reappearance had, I believe, contributed to the climate that produced that Thursday text. He had not paid child support consistently since Theo was 12 years old. There were arrears. I had actually helped Nadine navigate some of that years ago when she was considering taking him back to court. At the time, she decided not to pursue it. Said it wasn't worth the stress. The state of Georgia didn't agree with her decision, as it turned out. When I mentioned the arrears situation to my attorney, she made a call. Just to check the record, just to understand the full picture. He owed, and I want to say this number plainly, because I think plainness is important. He owed just over $42,000 in back child support, accrued over 12 years of incomplete payments, $42,000. When Nadine found out that this information had been surfaced through my attorney's inquiry, she came to me genuinely shaken. I don't think she had known the full number. She said something I'll remember for a long time. She said, "Why would you do that?" I said, "Because the truth matters. Because I've spent 31 years being the responsible one, and I needed you to see clearly who else was in that room on his birthday." She didn't have an answer for that. He didn't try to intervene in our divorce proceedings. Whatever reunion he'd been planning to build with Theo, whatever new chapter he'd imagined, apparently did not survive contact with the reality of $42,000 and a state child support enforcement office. I don't say that with satisfaction. I say it because it's part of the story, and the story should be told honestly. The house sold in 47 days. Slightly under asking, but not by much. The proceeds were divided according to what the attorneys worked out. I received the larger share, given the financial history, and Nadine received enough to establish herself comfortably. I was not trying to leave her destitute. I was not trying to punish anyone. I was trying to close a chapter cleanly. I moved to a smaller place, a house, not a condo, because I'm too old to live somewhere without a yard. It's in a quiet neighborhood, about 25 minutes from where we used to be. I have a garden again. I planted tomatoes last spring. They did surprisingly well. Theo and I have dinner about once a month. He's doing better job, more focused, seems to have learned some things from the upheaval that I hope will serve him. He's still figuring himself out. At 26, that's entirely appropriate. As for Nadine, we don't speak much. Not out of bitterness. We just don't have the architecture for a friendship, and I think pretending otherwise would be a disservice to what we actually had. What we had was real, and it ended. Both of those things can be true, people ask me. Friends, my brother. A few people I've told pieces of this to, they ask me if I regret it. If I wish I'd handled it differently. And I think about that question seriously, because I think it deserves a serious answer. I don't regret leaving. I think staying would have been a slower kind of harm, to both of us. There's a particular cruelty in remaining somewhere you are no longer truly welcome, and I believe Nadine had stopped making room for me long before that Thursday morning. I was the familiar presence, the stable background, the man who paid the bills and fixed the gutters and could be set aside when inconvenient. What I regret is that I didn't see it sooner. Or maybe, and this is the harder admission, maybe I did see it and I wasn't ready to know what it meant. At 63, you don't have unlimited amounts of time to spend on things that are already over. That's not bitterness. That's just arithmetic. The last thing I'll say is this. The morning after I moved into my new house, I woke up early. Old habit, never going away. And I made coffee, and I took it out to the backyard, and I just stood there in the quiet. The sun was just getting started. There were birds, a dog barking somewhere down the block, the ordinary sounds of a neighborhood waking up, and I didn't feel the way I expected to feel. I had expected some version of grief or emptiness or the specific weight of a life that didn't go the way you planned. Instead, I felt, this is going to sound strange, but I'm going to say it anyway, I felt like myself. Maybe more than I had in years. Like I had set down something heavy without realizing how heavy it was. I don't know what the rest of this looks like. I don't know if I'll meet someone or if I even want to. I know I have my health. I have my brother. I have a son, even now, who called me Dad when his voice cracked on the phone and he was 26 and scared. I have my yard. I have my tomatoes. I have, at 63, the very strange and very quiet gift of starting over. If you're sitting somewhere right now, and something in this story found you, if you know what it feels like to be the steady one, the responsible one, the one who shows up, I want you to know that walking away with your dignity intact is not a failure. Sometimes it's the most important thing you'll ever do. Leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if this story meant something to you, share it with someone who might need to hear it today. I've been thinking about what it actually costs to be the steady one. Not in money, though I could tell you that number down to the dollar if I had to. I mean the other cost, the one that doesn't show up on any account statement. The years of showing up quietly, of not making demands, of absorbing things, because you told yourself that's what a strong man does. You carry it because you can. And somewhere along the way, the people around you stop noticing the weight because you've never once put it down. That's what I did for 31 years. And I don't say that looking for sympathy. I say it because I think a lot of people watching this have done the same thing. And nobody has ever said it plainly to them. Being dependable is a virtue. But being taken for granted is a choice. And at some point, it becomes your choice to allow it. What happened with Nadine in that Thursday morning text wasn't a betrayal that came from nowhere. Looking back with clear eyes, I can see the choices that led there, hers and mine. She had gradually stopped including me. I had gradually stopped requiring it. Neither of us said anything out loud, and so the gap grew until one morning it was wide enough to send a text message across. What I learned, what I had to learn the hard way, at 63, is that integrity isn't just about how you treat other people. It's also about the standard you hold for how you allow yourself to be treated. I had built a life on responsibility, on follow-through, on being the man other people could count on. But somewhere I had confused self-sacrifice with self-respect, and those are not the same thing. The moment I stopped reacting emotionally and started thinking clearly, that was the moment something shifted in me. Not toward anger, toward honesty. I looked at the situation for what it was, not what I wished it was. That kind of clear-eyed accounting, that willingness to face hard facts without flinching, is something I wish I had practiced earlier. Not just in my marriage, in every corner of my life. And Theo, I think about him a lot. He's 26, and he's still becoming who he's going to be. The man who came back into his life, the man with $42,000 in unpaid obligations, showed him something real without meaning to. You cannot disappear for 15 years and then reclaim a seat at the table because it's convenient. Cause runs ahead of consequence, but consequence always arrives. Always. The account comes due. The only question is when. I'm not the same man I was before, that Thursday. I don't think I'd want to be. That man was good in many ways, but he had stopped asking himself hard questions. He had gotten comfortable with comfort, and comfort, unchecked, is how a person slowly disappears inside their own life. What I have now, the quiet mornings, the small yard, the dinner once a month with a son who called me Dad when his voice broke, that is enough. More than enough. It turns out that enough, freely chosen, feels a great deal like freedom.